Hilchas Keilim Pedig Chi. So the Rambam continues here with the dinim of Kli Matches. Starts off Kol Kli Matches Sheyesh Lam Shem B'fnei Atzmon Mekabel Tuma. A Kli Matches that has a Shem B'fnei Atzmon is Mekabel Tuma. Now the Rambam speaking, come the beginning L'chura, the Rambam speaks about other dinim. The Rambam speaking azay that there's a din that a Kli Matches, in order to be Mekabel Tuma, it has to be Nigmar Malachte. As we learned before, Gel Mikli Matches are not Mekabel Tuma. Now if you have a Kli Matches which is comprised of a number of parts, so it's pashut that this Kli Matches won't be Makabel Tumah until all these parts were made together, until it was Nigma Malachte, because it's one Keli. So then, only then is a Makabel Tumah. Now, if that Keli was fell apart, so it depends. If each Keli, L'moshel, a part of this Keli, is Oysemei Malachte Rishena, and on its own, this part of it is Oysemei Malachte Rishena, or let's say it's a Klei Kibbul, as we'll learn Behemshech, so then it's Makabel Tumah, because Lepel it's a Klei Kibbul, or it's Oysemei Malachte Rishena. But if on the other hand it's not Oysemei Malachte Rishena, and it's not a Klei Kibbul, so the question, but it's a component of the general Keli. So is that considered a Keli? At this point in time, is it considered a Keli? Because you could put it back together. But the question is, at this point in time, is that part called a Keli? Because it was already called a Keli. So on that is this din, that if it has a Shem B'fnei Atzmei, in other words, this component of this big Keli, which had a number of components, has a Shem B'fnei Atzmei. It's not called part of the original Keli, so it has like a Chshivas B'fnei Atzmei, so therefore it's called a Keli, as we'll see Behemshech. Masha'in Kain, if it's called part of the original Keli, as we'll see, Mashal, a branch of a candelabra. So a branch of a candelabra that's off the candelabra, so it's really, all it is, it's a component of the candelabra. It's not something which has a Shem B'fnei Atzmei. The Shem is a branch of the candelabra. So therefore it won't be Mekabel Tumah. Masha'inkin, the thing itself, the candelabra, even though it doesn't have the branches, for example, or whatever, other cases, as we'll see Behemshech. So then that will be Mekabel Tumah B'fnei Atzmei. That's l'chura the nekuda of the first part of the halacha. But then the Rambam speaks about things which are Kli Matches, which were made for karka. So memela, or made for a Kli Eitz, to mishamish a Kli Eitz, which is a Baba Mida, and therefore is not Makabel Tumah. So that Kli Matches is also not Makabel Tumah, which is l'chura a separate din. The Rambam starts off with Kol Kli Matches Yesh Lem Shem B'fnei Atzmam, and he goes into this din of a Keli which is going to be mishamish something which causes it not to be Makabel Tumah. Kol Pon Perik Chi. Kol Kli Matches Sheyesh Lem Shem B'fnei Atzmam. That's the rule. A Kli Matches which has a Shem B'fnei Atzmam, which has its own name, it's not called part of another Keli, is Mekabel Tumah, they are Mekabel Tumah. Chutz, Min Hadelis, a door, or Vahanagar, it's like an iron door, or Vahanagar, an iron bolt, or Vahamanul, an iron lock, or Vahapoises, Shetachas Atzir. Poises would be the Keli, you would have a hinge, the door would be standing on a hinge, and it would be turning on that hinge. Now that hinge would go into the ground, but not instead of just going into the ground, there would be like a Keli in the ground in order to hold this hinge. That would be the poisel, poises, shetachas hatziner, which is under the hinge, or vahatzir, the hinge itself, and vahakera, a metal beam, or vahatziner. A tziner normally is called a pipe. Its question is that a pipe which is connected to the door, or just a pipe. I'll call upon them all of these Keilim, so they are not Mekabel Tumah. Why? Mipnei. So even though this is the Rambam started off Kli Matches Yesh Lem Shem B'fnei Atzmam is Mekabel Tumah. So the question was l'chura, these Keilim seems to be that they would be called Yesh Lem Shem B'fnei Atzmam. But on the other hand, Mipnei She'elu Asuyin L'Karka, L'Shamish Sheitz. Because since these are made L'Shamish Zakarka, in other words, the door you're going to connect to a house which is connected to the Karka, so therefore it's not Mekabel Tumah. Or you're going to connect it to a shed, for example, which is a wooden shed, and since that wooden shed is not Makabel Tumah because a Kli Eitz Abba Mida, so therefore again, so it's a shem, even if it's a portable shed, so then again, so it's not Makabel Tumah. Therefore, ain't a Makabel Tumah. So Nachamol. So we have this rule that a Kli Matches Bechlal Sheyesh L'Shem B'fnei Atzmam is Makabel Tumah. However, these Keilim, even though l'chura they go into the category, that's what it sounds like. They go into the category of Shem B'fnei Atzmei, but they're not Mekabel Tumah because they're Asuyin L'Karka, L'Sham B'Shusetz. And then Vafilu Keilim Sheyikavu, even before you actually connected it to the Karka, or before you actually connected it to the Kli Eitz, but nevertheless, since that's the purpose of it, is to be connected to something which will cause it not to be Makabal Tumah, it's not Makabal Tumah. That's din number one. Then v'chol kli matchis sheyesh lo shem levai. A kli matchis which doesn't have a shem b'fnei atzmi. In other words, it has in its own right, but it's rather the whole thing is only to be mishamer something else. In other words, it has a name that's connected to something else, like we mentioned before, a branch of a candelabra. So it's not like a psazach itself; it's part of something else. Is einim stam b'fnei atzmi. It's not stam b'fnei atzmi. Mipnei shu kemiktzas keli ketza. So the Rambam gives an example. Akrav shel prumbia is tummy. Akrav is like a metal bit that was in part of the whole contraption that they would have the yoke on the animal. So there would be a metal bit that would go into the animal's mouth, and that would be called an akrav. So even though the Rambam is calling it an akrav shel prumbia, but nice it's just called an akrav, and that metal bit is mekabel tumah. However, ulachayim shalah, so there's to this metal bit, they also connected like things on the side of it that would be called like the cheeks of this metal bit. In other words, the metal bit would go into the mouth, and then on the side of the metal bit they would put side plates that would go on its cheeks of the behemoth. Ulachayim shal lechyab shalah, the lechayim of this akrov, which goes on the lechia behema, mikan and mikan, which goes on the two cheeks of the behema, is the herim. Behema kabim tumah b'fnei atzma, mipnei she'ein lehem shem b'fnei atzma. However, b'shas chiburi, while the lechayim is connected to the yakrov, so then it's akel mekabel tumah. So good is that. So we're learning this halacha that this prumbia, this akrov of the prumbia is mekabel tumah, even when it's not connected. In other words, this akrov of the prumbia is mekabel tumah because it has a shem b'fnei atzmi, and the l'chayayim, while the l'chayayim are connected to this akrav, so then it's mekabel tumah. Masha'in came when the l'chayayim are not connected to the prumbia, so since they're called l'chayayim of the akrav, l'chayayim shel akrav, l'chayayim shel prumbia, so therefore they don't have a shem b'fnei atzmi, the shem levai, therefore they're not mekabel tumah. Okay, halacha beis. This is another example. Tasin shel barzel. So again, you have like iron plates which the person puts on, connects to the helmet while he's at war. He connects it to the helmet, so he has a helmet, and he has the iron plates which goes on his cheeks to protect his face during war. So again, because they're considered the l'chayim of the kazda. The kazda is the metal helmet. But lapel, if these plates, sometimes they would have like a little thing of water, a little container which would be able to contain water, you should be able to drink from it. So as mistam kol kibul, that's a different din. Whereas even though it's really part of a bigger keli, but over here, since it's a clay kibul, so therefore it's makabel tumah. So nekudas advarim is if you have a keli which is comprised of two parts, and so the part that has a shem b'fnei atzmei, it's not considered a part of the other keli, so that's mekabel tumah. Masha'in came the part which is considered the whole shem of the keli is only a shem levai. It's called part of another keli, so it's not mekabel tumah. That's this din. Halacha gimel. So again the same din. Nezem ha'asui k'gdeira milmata u'ki'adasha milmata. You have an earring or a nose ring. So the nose ring has three parts. Let's say we're talking about over here. It has three parts. It has the actual piece of metal that goes into the nose, that goes into the ear, which is going to hold, so to speak, the earring. That's going to hold the earring. That's called the tzinoira. That's going to hold what the adornment is. And then you have, we're speaking over here, you have something, in the case over here, you have like a little lentil that's coming out of this piece of metal. And then you have under this little lentil, of silver or gold, then you have like something that looks like a little pot. So you have a tzinoira, you have an adasha, and then you have a kedera. So you have nesem ozi kedera mulmata. So the bottom of the nesem has a kedera, or kedasha mulmaila, and on top of that kedera there's an adasha. And now v'nifsek hakedera shalei, and the kedera fell off this nesem. So you have this nesem, which the kedera fell off, is mikabelas tumah b'fnei atzma. So this kedera, even though it's not really the main part of the earring or the nose ring. Nevertheless, mekabelas tumah from the atzma sheyesh l'beis kibul. The kedera, since it has a recipient, it was part of a keli and it has a recipient, so therefore it's mekabel tumah. Now the adasha itself, even though the adasha now there's this lentil, this piece of the earring, that's really l'chure. I mean, l'chure at this point in time it's not usable. It was part of an earring, it's not usable. But nevertheless, this was the main part of the earring. Notice the other part was just holding the earring onto the nose or onto the ear, because you have to have it to stick it in. But the main thing was the adasha. The adasha was the ornament. Is mekabelas tumah b'fnei atzma. Mipnei sheyesh l'shem b'fnei atzma. The shem b'fnei atzma is an earring or an adasha. But I'll call upon not an adasha, an adornment, a takshadik adasha. Aber v'hatznira shalei, the tznira is the shehi nichneses be'ezin b'yav. The part of it, that piece of metal that's on top, which is nichneses be'ezin b'yav, is ein mekabelas tumah b'fnei atzma. Mipnei she'ein lo shem b'fnei atzma. So since it has no shem b'fnei atzma, so that's again, so it doesn't have this din. Hoya nezem osui kimin eshkel. In other words, the nezem over here, he gave the example that you had a ring, an earring that was made with a lentil and a kedera. But what happens if you have an earring that's made out of like little pieces and they come together like a cluster of grapes? And now v'nifrak, and they fell apart, and all you have is little pieces. The cluster of grapes is torn. It doesn't have the mila of the kedera that we learned before, which has a biskibul, and also each little piece of this cluster doesn't have really a shem b'fnei atzmei, and it also doesn't do me'ein malachti rishena, because ein roy l'takshad mishanifrak. So therefore, it's not makabel tumah. So there we have a few illustrations of this din, of you have something that was part of something else, and now it's no longer part of that original thing. So we say whether or not it's makabel tumah or not. So we say if it has a shem b'fnei atzmei, in other words, it's the inyan itself, the original inyan. So if it's makabel tumah, masha'inkin, if it doesn't have a shem b'fnei atzmei, it's only considered an accessory to the other part. So then it's not makabel tumah. So that was the case we had. The first case we had was an akrov of a prumbia as makabel tumah, even as a bit. In other words, it's just standing there as a bit. It's makabel tumah, even though it's not connected to anything. Masha'inkin, the l'chayayim of this akrov wouldn't be makabel tumah because it doesn't have really a shem b'fnei atzmei. It has a din of l'chayayim. Al derech zeh, the tasin shel barzel that a person connects to a helmet is also, since those tasin shel barzel are only an accessory to the helmet, so they're not makabel tumah b'fnei atzmei, unless those tasim have a klei kibul. If they have a klei kibul, so then that gives it another din of a shem b'fnei atzmei. And now we had this din of this nose ring and the earring, where the tzinoira, which is the part you put into the ear, so the whole point of it is only to hold the earring. So therefore, that's not called the shem b'fnei atzmei. It's only the holder of the earring. Now the earring itself, so it depends. So we spoke about the adasha. The adasha is the earring, and therefore it is makabel tumah, even though it's a separate adasha, and it's really right now is not functional. And al derech zeh, the kedera, which is under the adasha, could also be makabel tumah, because lapel, that kedera is a makabel. Masha'enkin, if you would have, let's say, like an earring which is made like with metal, which is a cluster of grapes, of little pieces of gold together, and now they all fell apart. So each piece is not considered a shem b'fnei atzmei, and it's not a klei kibul. So therefore, it's not makabel tumah. Halacha dalet. Tabas achas shemanichen habonis beregel achas. There would be a mitzvah, a women, she would wear socks, and those socks, in order for those socks to stay up, they would put like a band, like a certain ring on her foot, in order to keep those stockings up. So mele, there's a din that a keli, which is mishamish a keli, is not makabel tumah. A keli, which is mishamish a keli, like we learned before, the tabas, which was used to tighten the clothes, which was near the masnayim or the bein haksafayim. There was the tabas, which was used to tighten the clothes. That wasn't considered to be makabel tumah. So that is over here. Tabas achas, which there's one ring, shemanichan abonis beregel achas, they put on one foot. There's here on the kras biris, that's called the biris. Ve'ena mekabelas tumah. Why? Mipnei she'eino le'atzuras klei tachshid. It's not a klei tachshid. It's not something which is an ornament. El k'mei tabas hakelim. It's a tabas hakelim. A tabas shekesha bebing seifov. Just like we learned that tabas hakelim is not makabel tumah. a ring which you attach to a keli, or a ring which you put and to help the clothes being safer, to tie your clothes better together. But I'll call ponim, it's an accessory to clothes, that's not called a keli. Avo, shtei taboy, shemisimis habonis b'ragleim, they would put two rings on their legs, and v'shalsheles muteles b'nei mizuluzu, and there would be a chain between those two taboys. So then it's mekabel tumah. That is mekabel tumah. Why? Mipnei shein takshiti abonis. So this is called takshiti abonis. Mashenkim biris is not takshiti abonis. It's only a keli, which is mishamish a keli, and therefore mipnei shein takshiti. So therefore they're not mekabel tumah. So that's v'heina nekroim kvolim. So again, so there's a thing called a biris. A biris is when you have one tabas, which is there to be mishtamish, and you put it on one foot. It's not a takshit. It's only there to be mishamish a keli. So a keli which is there to mishamish a keli is not mekabel tumah. Masha'enkin kvalim is when you have two rings, and those two rings are tied together with a chain, and that would be a takshit. Halacha hey. Katla shel chulyes shel matches. You have a necklace that's made out of pieces of metal which is decorative metal, or is gold or silver, or something to decorate. The haim, and they're all in they're put into a chutz, onto a chutz shel tzemeh shel pishtam. So you have a necklace. A necklace is made out of, you have a string which is made out of either wool or linen, and on this string of wool and linen you put on pieces of metal which obviously have holes in it, the string goes into it, and that's how the necklace is. That's how she wears the necklace. And then the nifsa kachut. Now that string was torn, and now you have just those pieces which were part of the necklace. You have pieces which are part of the necklace, and obviously those pieces which are part of the necklace at this point in time is not functional as a necklace. But on the other end, they have a name. Their name are the chulyas of the necklace. So the vice is that they're called a name. Not only I'm saying the chulyas of the necklace, the vice is the chulyas are called a shem b'fnei atzmei. So the din is a chulyas mekablas tumah. Those pieces of metal that were part of the necklace, each piece is mekablas tumah. Just like we learned before that the adasha of the earring is mekabel tumah, even though the adasha can't function without the tzinoira, and it's going to have to be connected to the tzinoira. But at this point in time, the adasha has a name of being an earring. It's an earring. It's an earring that's missing that part which is connected to the ear. So Aldera said, this is a necklace. This is a necklace which is missing that string which is connected to the neck. So Aldera Achulyes is mekablis tumah. Shkol achas v'achas keilim b'fnatzma. Each chulya is considered a keilim b'fnatzma. Now hoya, that's talking about that the string was made out of wool or flax, and now you had the chulyes which were connected to that string. Now what about fakir? Hoya achutshula shel matchas. The string was made out of metal, and v'achulyes shel avonim tevish shel margolish shel zchuchas. And now the parts that were over the string was either diamonds or glass or precious stones, and the nishburu achulyes, and those precious stones were broken. V'achut kayim, and the original chut is kayim. Now the original chut is metal, and the original chut, this is also a decorative piece. In other words, the chut in itself is decorative. V'achut kayim is areze mistami b'fnei atzmei. So then the chut becomes tamei, because lepel, the chut in itself is a shem b'fnei atzmei. In other words, the chut has a shem b'fnei atzmei, and it's mekabel tumah. It's a kli matras, is mekabel tumah as a takshut. Now shiori katla, let's say the chut was torn, and you only have something left over of that chut. How big does the chut have to be in order to be mekabel tumah? Kimlei tzavr k'tana. It has to be big enough that it could be a necklace for a little girl. So for a little girl, which has a small neck, so if it's large enough that it could be a necklace for a little girl, so then it's mekabel tumah. That's his din. So the nukud of the din is that any part of an original keli, but that part is a shem b'fnei atzmei, so it's mekabel tumah. That's one din, and then there was a din. Let's say it would be a mekabel. It would be a mekabel. We learned b'negea the cheeks of the helmet. So over there, if it has a clay kibble, so it's mekabel tumah. That is the kedera of the earring is also mekabel tumah. Then we learned that the beginning of the din, which is l'chura another general din that Keilim, which were made in order to be nischaber lekarka, that was the door and the lock and things, and the beam, which all connected to be nischaber lekarka, to be connected to a keli, which is not mekabel tumah because it's a klietz, so that's not mekabel tumah. Halacha vov. Now, kol hakisuyin shel matchis. If you have a box, for example, and it has a cover, and that cover is made out of metal, is teherim. Ve'ein mekabel tumah because misheim lehem shem b'fnei atzmai. In other words, it doesn't have a shem b'fnei atzmai. In other words, while this cover is attached to the keli, so then it's considered part of the keli. Mashenkin, the cover is a separate piece, is just a cover of a keli. That's not called a shem b'fnei atzmi. And therefore, it's not makabel tumah. Chutz b'kisui amechom, the kisui of a samovar, of something you cook up water with, or mikisui teni shorefim, or the kisui of the box that the doctors use, mipnei shemanichem beis espolonis, since they would take this cover off, and they would use this cover to contain like bandages and things that they would put on this cover in order to do whatever they were doing as a doctor. So that kisui was like a keli b'fnei atzmi. It wasn't only a covering for the teni of the reichve. It was actually a keli b'fnei atzmi. Vice versa, kisui amecham was also used as a keli b'fnei atzmi. The Ram doesn't say. So and therefore it's not a kli kibul. It has a din of a kli kibul. Now that's talking about the whole function of this covering is only as a covering. However, kisui shel matches sheshafei v'lotche v'asomara. If you went ahead and took a covering of matches and you made it into a mirror, in other words, you smoothed it out and you made it shine, and therefore it became a mirror. So then it's a mekabel tumah. Halacha ches kol hamishkoyle shel matches mekablis tumah. Weights. In other words, you have weights. You would have you want to weigh something, so you would have something that would be a designated weight, and then you'd know its weight, and then you would weigh something against it. So there would be a piece of metal that would be a weight. You'd know a designated weight. So all those pieces of metal, which are called weights, are mekablis tumah. Veheina nekrois unkiyos. So in other words, a piece of metal which was designated as a weight to weigh other things with is unkiyos, and that's mekabel tumah. Now, knei miznaim shalates, if you have a rod of wood, which you would weigh on that rod of wood, and knows that rod, there would be a vertical rod going down from somewhere, and then there would be a horizontal rod connected to that vertical rod, and then you would weigh it somewhere or another. You would either have a pan hanging from that horizontal rod, or you would have hooks connected to that horizontal rod. But I'll call upon it, there was talking about a knei miznaim shalates. You have a rod which is used for weights that's made out of wood. And there was weights of metal that were connected to that rod. So that rod, really, the purpose of the rod is these weights of metal, which is going to go, and you're going to use it as a scale. So memela, so mekabel tumah, so that knei miznaim is mekabel tumah, b'pnei unkiyos atloyis, because of these weights which are hanging on this rod. So therefore, this rod becomes bottled to these unkiyos, to these pieces of metal which are weights, and memela is mekabel tumah. Because when we're talking about a weight, there's a rod and the weights that are being used by people that are use it for merchandise. They sell wool, they sell flax. Aval shebalabatim, someone that's just knows it's not. So they use it permanently. So therefore, it's considered the fact that this rod is bottled to these weights. Aval shebalabatim, a person that's just a regular balabas and he uses this weight, but it's not really something he uses permanently. Eine mekabel tumah, the rod, just the fact that the weight is hanging on this rod, the rod doesn't become bottled to the weight. Because lepel, this rod is not really there, the rod will be used for other things. It's not like bottled to this weight. So therefore, in order for that rod to become bottled to the weight, in other words, the weight is something which could be mekabel tumah. The rod b'etzem is a klietz. A klietz is not mekabel tumah. The only way for a klietz to be mekabel tumah if it becomes bottled to the weight. So we say, if you're a professional, so mainly this is the regular way when he does it. He not always needs this weight on this rod. so the rod becomes bottled to the weight. But we're talking about a person that's a regular person. So mela, so the rod is not really bottled to the weight. So in order for the rod to become bottled to the weights, it has to be that they were mamish connected. It was kvuois by. They were connected to it in a kavua way, and only then is the rod makabel tumah because it's bottled to the weight. Halacha tes mishkolis shenishtabru. If you have weights that were broken, you have a piece of weight, a metal weight, piece of weight, and somehow or another it fell apart. Is afal pisher zira, and you put it together, but you didn't really mamish. It's not mamish one piece. You can put it together and weigh with it, but it's not really one piece of a shekel bem. Einon mekabel tumah. They're not mekabel tumah because each part is not really a part in itself. Yiched mehem chatzeilit, and if you took this weight, which was originally, let's say, a full liter, and now you're weighing it, and it's like you're weighing it as a half a liter. So now it's no longer a half a weight. It's which needs the other weight together with it in order to weigh it. It has its own weight. Yiched mehem chatzeilit, or shlishi liter, or reviel liter. So then it's a reil mekabel tumah because lepel right now it became a new weight. It's not a broken original weight. It's a new weight. Halacha yud, sela shenifsela. If you have a sela, and has a weight, obviously, and now that sela is puzzle, so maybe you can't really use it as a coin, and now v'eskina is shekel, but so you designated it that you're going to use it as a weight. So it's mekabel stuma because again now it becomes a din weight. Halacha yud aleph, unkeli shel katofim tohira, aber v'shel roichlin mistamen. Now we're talking about you have a rod that people carry things on their shoulders. You have a rod that you have a person carrying something on the front and on the back of the rod, and that rod is going over his shoulder, and that's how he's able to carry things front of him and the back of him. Now, in order to make sure that whatever is hanging on the rod shouldn't fall off the rod, so there's like a hook at the end of the rod, on both sides on the end of the rod, in order to prevent whatever package or whatever part of whatever he's carrying on this rod not to fall off the rod. So basically, this hook is being shamish the rod. Now, since this rod is a klietz, the klietz is not makabel tumah, and this unkeli is bottled to the klietz. It's not that the klietz is bottled to the unkeli. The unkeli is bottled to the klietz. So therefore, it's toyer because the unkeli is bottled to something which is a klietz, which is not makabel tumah. Pshuti klietz is not makabel tumah. However, v'shel reichlin vaisto is the Reichlim would have their rod would be something that would be a makabel. There was not sure exactly that's here, but the Reichlim would have something in this rod which would make the rod into a makabel. So therefore, the unkeli that the Reichlim would use, the people that would be selling things, the people that are peddlers, so they are mistabi. Unkeli shel nakliti amita. There's also teir. Nakliti amita are two rods on two sides of the bed, in the front of the bed and the back of the bed, that they put up two rods, and then there would be a beam across the two rods. Two pieces of wood would go up on both sides of the bed, and then they would put up another piece of wood across the length of the bed, and then they would hang a sheet over these pieces of wood, and that's how the person that would be sleeping in the bed would be under this sheet, and that would protect him from flies or other things that were flying around. Now, there's some type of an unkeli on this nakliti amita, some type of a hook that assisted this nakliti amita, maybe assisted in holding the sheet. But I'll call upon him. It's the nakliti the unkeli of the nakliti amita was being mishamish this piece of wood. So again, since this piece of wood is not makabel tumah, so meilal there is the unkeli which is mishamish this piece of wood is also not makabel tumah. V'shel dargish, but however an unkeli which is a hook. That was for a dargish. A dargish is like a small footstool. It would be something really that you would get up onto the bed with. It would be like a little step that you go up onto the bed. And a dargish is makabel tumah. It's makabel tumah. It's made out of oir, and it's makabel tumah smedris. So memela, so the unkeli of the dargish is mistamel. Now that is a unkeli. The point over here is when you have a metal that's being mishamish something which be'etzim is not makabel tumah, and it's only being mishamish it. So memela, it's also not makabel tumah. That's the nikud of these halachas l'chur. Unkeli shel kaveres hatzayodim. A kaveres hatzayodim is like a cylinder type of keli, which be'etzim is not makabel tumah because it's made out of wood and it's mustamba vaistois. It's a klietz abor b'mida. I'll call upon him shitzodim behem dogim with this kaver shel tzayodim, this type of a it's no, it's a kli'etz which doesn't have a din of a keli al kopon. Could be it's not a klikibul. Could be it's just, in other words, the water goes in and the water goes out. I'm not really sure. The tzir of the kaveres atzayodim, but a kaveres atzayodim is not mekabel tuma. So you have the unkli of this kaveres atzayodim shetzodim b'madogim, which kaveres atzayodim are used to catch fish, is tehera. However, v'shel shida, nor is the hook of a shida, which is a box, which is mekabel tuma, it's a smaller box, is mistama. Unkli shel meneres eitz, the hook of a meneres eitz we learned before was a kli'etz, which is not mekabel tuma because it's a kli'etz which doesn't have a klikibul, is toy. However, v'shel shulchan, a shulchan we learned before, since it's mishamish midrabanan, but it's mishamish side the adam, side the Keilim, so a shulchan is mistami. So that's the nekuda, that if we're talking about hooks of something that's makabel tumah, it's makabel tumah. Hooks of something which is not makabel tumah is not makabel tumah. V'shel shulchan mistam zaklau. Kol keli shemekabel tumah b'fnei atzmim and atera, which is a little shver, because shulchan is l'chore not makabel tumah b'fnei atzmim and atera. But I'll call upon kol keli shemekabel tumah b'fnei atzmim and atera is hariya unkli shel matchus shalei, the hook of matchus of that keli. V'alder is a v'shel shel shalei. Or let's say if it has a chain attached to it, is mekabelas tumah, because it becomes bottled to something which is also mekabel tumah. The keli she'enim mekabel tumah, keli that's not mekabel tumah, kigem pshuti kli'etz, like we spoke about the nakliti amita, or a kli'etz aboim b'mida, or kli'etz b'em. So then unkli shel matches, v'hashel shel shalei enim mekabel tumah. That's it, and that's all talking about. If it's talking about an unkli which is connected to something which is mekabel tumah. The unkli itself, whether it's an unkli of something that's mekabel tumah, or it's an unkli of something that's not mekabel tumah, is toir. She'ena unkli e'ashal is keli b'fnei atzma. That goes into the original din. And as we learned before, that a kli matchis, which doesn't have a shem b'fnei atzma, is not mekabel tumah. So, male, if you have l'mashal unkli, and the unkli is an unkli of a shida. So the shida is makabel tumah. The unkli of the shida is also makabel tumah. When is the unkli of the shida makabel tumah? When the unkli is connected to the shida. Masha'inkin, when the unkli is separated from the shida, so Memela now it doesn't have a din of a shem b'fnei atzmei. So therefore, she'ena unkli ashal shel is keli b'fnei atzmei, ela rein kemixes keli. So therefore, it's not makabel tumah. Va'afilu unkli shebikisolim shetelim ba'akelim ba'abgodim. Because you have a hook that you connect to the wall. I don't know what the afilu is. Afilu unkli shebiksolim. You have an unkli which you're going to connect to the wall, and you're going to hang up clothes on it. Why? Because the pashtus is this unkli is unkli b'fnei atzma. Yeah, it's tak an unkli b'fnei atzma, but lepel, this unkli is going to be attached to a wall, and since it's going to be attached to a wall, so therefore, as we learned before, a delis which is going to be attached to karka is not going to be makabel tumah. So Aldera is that this unkli, which is going to be attached to a wall, is not makabel tumah. So the nekudas advarim is that anything that's made in order to become bottled to something that's makabel tumah, so while it's connected to that something, it's makabel tumah. Masha'inkin, if it's even though and masha'inkin, if it's made to be connected to something which is not makabel tumah, even though it's be'emes a kli matchis, it's a matchis, but it's not a matchis in itself. It's not a keli in itself. It's being used as a mishamish to another keli. So the fact that it's a matchis is not going to give it a shem keli to be makabel tumah. And that's the number one. And the number two is that even if it was makabel tumah, because it was a unkeli for something which is makabel tumah, it's only makabel tumah while it's an unkeli, acting as an unkeli. Mashenkin, if that unkeli was separated, so the unkeli b'fnei atzmei is not makabel tumah. Halacha yud beis shalshelis sheyesh ba beis ne'ilah. If you have a chain that has a way of locking itself up, in other words, it's like it's something which has a lock to it. So then it's mistami. So this shalshelis could be used to lock things. If you have a chain which is just to tie up, it's brought down. That means to tie around a behema, a little dog, and it's only used like an adornment for to adorn the dog. It's a takshin for a dog. A takshin of an animal doesn't have a din of a keli. So meilis tehira. I'll call upon him a shalshelis if it has a base ne'ilah is mistami. Halacha yud gimel. Now shalshelis shel sitainis. Sitainis means people that sell things, that sell wood, sell bread wholesale, is mistamen mipnei shehinelin bois hachanuyas. Now this shalshelis is used to lock up the chanuyas. However, v'shal balabatim is tehera she'ein elanoy. You have to know the mitzias over here, because before the Rambam said a shalshelis that has a base ne'ilah is mistamen. There was no negea what. It was a shalshelis which could be used. Here, vice versa, the shalshelis doesn't have a base ne'ilah. But nevertheless, it's mistami because it has a function. The function is that it closes up the chanuyas. Now, these chanuyas, vaistis, even though the vaistis mechubel lekarka, or at least they're not a keli which is makabel tumah, but lepel, since it's not something which is remains mechuber to it, it's something that just closes it up and then takes it off. So therefore, it's not considered like we learned before a delis, which is made for the karka or even for something which is a kliyetz. It's not makabel tumah. So l'chur, since over here it's made for chanuyas, so it's not considered becoming bottled the chanuyas. I'll call upon the shalshelis shel sitoines, since they're used to be noel the chanuyas, are makabel tumah. That's the halacha. The shabalabatim is tehera, because even though maybe they also use the shalshelis, but they only use it elu l'noy. Halacha yudalet shalshelis shel moishchei karka. There's people that would be measuring. You would want to measure the size of a piece of karka. So they would use a chain, because a rope sometimes would stretch, and in the winter it would be a different in the winter and the summer. So they use a chain in order it should be an exact measurement. So they would have a shalshelis, a rope, and then they would also have a peg to put the shalshelis in the ground to be able to schlep it and to be able to measure. V'yiseidisayim shetoikim bekarka, b'shoah shemeishchin, that, and those yiseidis is mekabel tumah. So they are mekabel tumah. Because that's a keli, that's considered a keli. So even though you stick it into the ground, but you're not sticking it into the ground to stay into the ground. You're only sticking it into the ground for temporarily to use. But lepel, it's a keli. It's matchis and it has a function. So therefore, it's makabel tumah. However, v'shal nekoshi sheyetzim, those chains which are used for the people that are gathering wood and then they tie the wood together and schlep it with it, is tehera lefishi mishamesh seitz, because the whole purpose of the chain is in order to tie the wood together. So that's considered something which is mishamish seitz. Halacha tezvav shalsheles dli godel. Now you have a large pail. So a pail, if it's a large pail, so it's a lot of water. So the only way to be able to schlep it with a shalsheles, if it's not a long shalsheles, if you have a long shalsheles and it's a large pail, and it's a lot of water, you're not going to be able to schlep it. So if the shalsheles is within 4 tvachim of the dli, so then you could schlep it. You could schlep up the dli. When you have a smaller pail could be schlepped also if it's large, if it's a larger chain. So even 10 tvachim could become bottled to the dli. In other words, we're talking about what part of the shalshelis could be used l'tzerach of schlepping up the dli. Now the dli is makabel tumah because it's a klei kibul. Now this shalshelis is becoming bottled to this klei kibul. Sizazeh. Shalshelis dli gadol, the chain of a large pail, is arba tvachim imeno. If the 4 tvachim of this shalshelis samuch l'dli is mistami madli, becomes tummy together with the dli. In other words, it's considered a keli, and memela it also becomes tummy. It could be if something tummy touches that part of the shalshelis, or if something touches the dli, the shalshelis becomes tummy, because that part of the shalshelis is considered bottled to the dli. Mipnei shehi tzerech hadli, because it's a tzerech hadli, that's how you're going to be able to pick up the dli. V'hashar, but the rest is Torah. L'fish ein li shem b'fnei atzmei. In other words, it's not. There's nothing to this shalshelis which has a shem b'fnei atzmei. It's the shalshelis of a dli, and lepel it's not part of the dli. So therefore, this shalshelis is not makabel tumah because it has no shem b'fnei atzmei. That's what the Rambam says. The shalshelis dli cotton, but a shenk and the chain of a dli cotton. So over there, since it could be schlepped even if it's a larger chain, so therefore asarat tvachim, because you could even schlep it from asarat tvachim. So a dli cotton which could be schlepped even with a chain of asarat tvachim, so the asarat tvachim which is next to the dli is bottled to the dli and is considered part of the dli. Mashain came a dli gadol which can't be schlepped if it would be from 10 tvachim, if it will be hanging 10 tvachim, we won't be able to schlep it because it's too heavy. So therefore, only 4 tvachim is considered part of the dli and is makabel tumah. But the rest of the shalshelis, since it's not really an inya b'fnei atzmei, it's a shalshelis of the dli, and it's not really bottled to the dli, so therefore it's not makabel tumah. Halacha tezayin hakadosh shel matches, a metal ball which would be used by builders for demolishing, and v'hasadin is an anvil that was made out of metal that a smith would use to work on. V'hakanter shel banoi, a metal shaft that a builder would use. V'hadeker shel choresh, a carpenter would have also a metal peg that he would use in his carpentry. V'hachamer shel napoch, chamer literally means a donkey of a smith, which means he would have something made out of metal that's shape of a donkey, and he would use it either to work on it or he would sit on it. But al kol panim has a din of a keli. V'hamutulteles, v'hamishkele shel banoim, things that builders use to see whether the wall is straight. So the plumb weights of the builders. V'hakirayim shel barzel shechevtim bem zazesim. So if you would have, let's say, an iron pole, an iron beam that they would be used in order to press the olives. V'hafarches shel matches. Farches shel matches is a metal dispenser that you would pour the wheat into in order for it to go into the mill. So it would be something which was made out of metal, so it had a din of a keli. V'ha'oiler shekursim be'asefrim reish hakol mishel kana. So a blade that the people, when you're making the pen that the seifrim writes with, so to cut that reed, so you would have a blade to cut the reed in order to make it into a proper kulmus. And v'hakulmus shel matches, or if you have a pen that's made out of metal, a metal pen, not instead of being made out of a reed, it's made out of a metal. Or v'hakana shemisartetin be'asefrim. There's this, when they make the sirtut, they make the lines, so they would use a stylus, something that would be the kan, would be the stylus that would be used in order to make the lines. V'hakana would be the ruler that would also be used to make the lines. Is kol elo, all these metal instruments are makablim tumah. Shkol echad mem yesh li shem b'fnei atzmei. So each one of them has its own name. In other words, each one has its own name. So even though, let's say, it's being used together, for example, the kan and the kana work together. The kana is not used, the ruler is not used on its own. It's used only together with the kan. But nevertheless, since each one has its own name, so therefore they're makabel tumah. So really, we said in the beginning that this din, that a shem b'fnei atzmei, is only when they're really one part of one keli. But l'chura over here in the Rambam we see lav dafka. In other words, there's a din, you have a keli, and that keli is a shem b'fnei atzmei. You know, it has a shem b'fnei atzmei, so that in itself gives it a shem keli. In other words, when we had the marshal, the umkali, the hooks, so the hooks didn't really have a shem b'fnei atzmei because it's only a hook of something. Or there is the shalshelis. There's things which are only something of the shalshelis of a dli. So therefore, it's only a keli as being an accessory to another keli. So therefore, it's only a keli while it's connected to the other keli. Masha'enkin is a separate entity. It's not a keli. Masha'enkin here, we're talking about things that weren't really part of something else. Over here, they're kelim in its own. But since each thing, even though they work together with other things, but l'peil, since each thing has a shem b'fnei atzmei, so therefore it's makabel tumah. It's makabel tumah b'fnei atzmei.